The phone rang at exactly 2:37 in the afternoon, while I was reviewing quarterly reports in my corner office. My mother's voice came through the speaker shaking with what sounded like genuine desperation. She was crying about losing their house and needing $50,000 immediately. Between sobs, she mentioned my sister Sarah's ongoing medical costs and kept repeating how family helps family. I stared at the financial documents spread across my mahogany desk, my eyes focusing on the credit report I'd pulled on my parents just last month. There, in black and white, was the proof of their brand new $68,000 luxury SUV purchase. The shocking realization hit me like a freight train that they'd been lying about everything using my sister's long-recovered illness as an emotional weapon. The memories of my childhood came flooding back as I sat there listening to my mother's manipulative tears. I was 6 years old when everything changed. That's when Sarah, just 8 at the time, was diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia. From that moment forward, I became invisible in my own home. My parents transformed overnight from somewhat attentive caregivers into complete strangers who acted like I didn't exist. Every conversation revolved around Sarah's treatment schedule, her medication, her comfort, her needs. I remember standing in the kitchen one morning, stomach growling, because there was no breakfast prepared, watching my mother carefully pack Sarah's favorite cookies and juice boxes for another hospital visit. When I asked what I was supposed to eat, she snapped at me for being selfish and told me to figure it out myself. The pattern continued relentlessly. My father quit his weekend coaching job to drive Sarah to appointments, but when I made the Little League team, he told me I'd have to find my own transportation. My mother spent hours researching special diets and supplements for Sarah, but when I caught pneumonia and needed medicine, she handed me $20 and told me to walk to the pharmacy. School became my only refuge, but even there the neglect followed me. While other parents attended school plays, science fairs, and parent-teacher conferences, mine were mysteriously absent. Mrs. Henderson, my second-grade teacher, pulled me aside one October afternoon and gently asked why my parents never seemed available for school events. I made up excuses about them being busy with Sarah's treatments, protecting them, even as they abandoned me. The isolation deepened as months turned into years. By age 10, I was doing my own laundry, cooking simple meals, and walking myself to school in all kinds of weather. Sarah's bedroom became a shrine filled with get-well cards, stuffed animals, and expensive electronics, while my room remained sparse and forgotten. When relatives visited, they brought armloads of gifts for Sarah and maybe remembered to acknowledge me with an awkward pat on the head. My parents made it clear through their actions that my accomplishments meant nothing. When I won the school spelling bee in 4th grade, they missed the ceremony because Sarah had a routine blood test. When I scored the winning goal in our soccer championship, they arrived just as the game ended, having spent the entire match at yet another medical appointment that could have been scheduled differently. The most painful part was watching them perform for outsiders. In public, they played the role of devoted parents dealing with a family crisis. They'd put their arms around both Sarah and me for photos, post updates on social media about their brave children, and accept sympathy from friends and neighbors. But behind closed doors, I was an afterthought, a burden they resented having to acknowledge. Sarah's recovery progressed steadily, and by her 12th birthday, her doctors declared her in complete remission. I foolishly thought things would return to normal, that my parents would finally have time and energy for me again. Instead, they'd grown so accustomed to their pattern of favoritism that it became permanently embedded in our family dynamic. The climactic twist came during my freshman year of high school. I was walking past my parents' bedroom when I heard my mother on the phone with her sister. She was complaining about how difficult it was to manage 2 problematic children, describing me as resentful and jealous of Sarah's needs. She painted herself and my father as martyrs, sacrificing everything to care for not just a sick child, but also a difficult, demanding son who couldn't understand the gravity of the situation. I stood frozen in the hallway, realizing they'd been rewriting history to make themselves the heroes and me the villain. They weren't just neglecting me accidentally due to overwhelming circumstances, they were deliberately choosing to exclude me while telling everyone else that I was the problem child who made their lives harder. That night, lying in my bed staring at the ceiling, I understood that my parents had never seen me as their son who needed love and support. To them, I was an inconvenience, a complication that interfered with their ability to focus entirely on Sarah. The foundation of neglect they'd built wasn't temporary or circumstantial. It was intentional, permanent, and designed to justify their complete emotional abandonment of me. High school became my battleground for survival and self-determination. While my parents continued their pattern of lavishing attention on Sarah and ignoring my existence, I decided to forge my own path. The academic excellence I pursued wasn't just about good grades anymore. It became my lifeline, my proof to myself that I had value, even if my own family couldn't see it. My sophomore year English teacher, Mr. Rodriguez, noticed my dedication and pulled me aside after class one afternoon. He asked about my college plans and seemed genuinely shocked when I told him my parents hadn't discussed higher education with me at all. He spent the next hour explaining application processes, scholarship opportunities, and timeline requirements that my parents should have been helping me navigate. I threw myself into every available opportunity. Academic clubs, volunteer work, part-time jobs at the local grocery store and pizza shop. While other teenagers complained about their parents being too involved in their lives, I was learning independence out of necessity. My paychecks went toward buying my own clothes, school supplies, and even groceries when the family shopping trips somehow never included items I needed. The contrast with Sarah's experience was stark and painful. Her grades were mediocre at best, but my parents celebrated every C+, like it was a Nobel Prize. They attended every single one of her volleyball games despite her spending most of the season on the bench. When she expressed interest in photography, they immediately bought her a $1,500 camera and enrolled her in expensive weekend workshops. Meanwhile, when I was inducted into the National Honor Society, they missed the ceremony because Sarah wanted to go shopping for homecoming accessories. When I won the regional debate championship, they were at one of Sarah's volleyball tournaments in another state. The pattern was so consistent it felt deliberate rather than coincidental. College applications became my secret project. I forged their signatures on financial aid forms, wrote my own recommendation requests, and researched schools entirely on my own. My guidance counselor, Mrs. Patterson, became increasingly concerned about the lack of parental involvement. She called home several times to discuss my exceptional academic record and scholarship potential, but my parents always claimed they were too busy with Sarah-related obligations to meet with her. Working 25 hours a week while maintaining a 4.0 grade point average exhausted me physically but kept me focused mentally. The pizza shop manager, Tony, became something of a father figure, teaching me about work ethic, financial responsibility, and self-respect. He was more proud of my achievements than my biological parents had ever been. Senior year brought the ultimate test of my resilience. While filling out college applications, I discovered that my parents had never saved a single dollar for my education. The college fund my grandparents had started for me when I was born had mysteriously disappeared. When I confronted my father about it, he mumbled something about medical expenses and emergency situations, refusing to give me any detailed explanation. Sarah, despite her average grades and minimal extracurricular involvement, was already being promised a college experience funded entirely by my parents. They discussed her potential majors, campus visit trips, and sorority life with excitement I'd never seen them show for any aspect of my life. When I announced I'd received full academic scholarships to 3 prestigious universities, they responded with distracted congratulations and immediately changed the subject back to Sarah's prom dress selection. The guidance office became my sanctuary. Mrs. Patterson helped me navigate the complex scholarship application process and even wrote me a recommendation letter that brought tears to my eyes when she read it aloud. She described my resilience, academic excellence, and character in ways my own parents never had. Graduation day arrived with its own special brand of heartbreak. Every other graduate had family members cheering from the audience, taking pictures, and celebrating afterward. My parents attended Sarah's softball banquet, instead claiming they couldn't miss her end-of-season awards ceremony. I walked across that stage alone, accepted my multiple academic achievement awards alone, and drove home alone, while my classmates went out for celebration dinners with their proud families. The climactic twist came the night before I left for college. I couldn't sleep, so I went downstairs to get some water. As I passed the living room, I heard my parents talking quietly with Sarah. My mother's voice carried clearly through the partially open door as she told Sarah she was the only child who truly mattered to them. My father agreed, adding that they were actually glad I was finally leaving so they could focus entirely on what was important. Sarah's response surprised me. She sounded uncomfortable and told them they were being unfair to me. But my mother cut her off, explaining that some children require all your love and attention, while others are just naturally independent and don't need the same level of care. I stood in the hallway, my packed bags, sitting by the front door, listening to my parents essentially erase me from their concept of family. The neglect I'd experienced for 12 years wasn't accidental or temporary. It was their conscious choice to invest everything in Sarah while treating me like an unwanted burden they couldn't wait to be rid of. That revelation crystallized my understanding of our relationship. They hadn't failed to notice my achievements, my struggles, or my needs. They had actively chosen to ignore them. As I climbed the stairs to spend my last night in that house, I made a silent promise to myself that I would succeed not just despite their neglect, but because of what it had taught me about self-reliance and determination. The next morning, I loaded my car and left for college without any fanfare or emotional goodbyes. My parents barely looked up from their coffee as I announced my departure, but I felt lighter with every mile I drove away from that house, knowing I was finally free to become whoever I was meant to be, without the constant weight of their indifference holding me back. College opened up a world I'd never imagined possible. For the first time in my life, I was surrounded by people who judged me based on my capabilities and character rather than dismissing me as an afterthought. My roommate Jake came from a loving family that immediately adopted me into their social gatherings and holiday celebrations. Being around functional family dynamics showed me just how abnormal my childhood had been. Academically, I flourished without the emotional drainage of constantly seeking parental approval that would never come. My computer science professors recognized my natural aptitude for programming and encouraged me to pursue independent projects. While other students were going to parties, I spent weekends in the computer lab teaching myself advanced coding languages and working on software development projects. During my sophomore year, I started a small tech consulting business from my dorm room. Local businesses needed help with basic website development and computer system setups, and I discovered I had a talent for translating complex technical concepts into practical solutions. What started as beer money quickly grew into a legitimate income stream. My parents called occasionally, but never to ask about my studies, my health, or my general well-being. Every conversation followed the same script. After minimal small talk, they'd mention some financial need related to Sarah's life, her car maintenance, her sorority dues, her spring break trips, or her apartment furnishing expenses. They presented these requests as family obligations, assuming I should contribute to Sarah's comfort since she'd been through so much during her childhood illness. I provided small amounts initially, feeling guilty about my growing financial success, while they portrayed themselves as struggling. But I noticed the requests became more frequent and specific as my business grew. They seemed to have an uncanny ability to time their calls right after I'd landed major contracts or received scholarship disbursements. Sarah herself rarely contacted me directly during college. When she did, it felt forced and scripted, like our parents had pressured her to maintain some minimal relationship. She'd ask superficial questions about school and quickly steer conversations toward asking for money for various needs. I began to suspect she was reporting back to our parents about my financial situation. By junior year, my consulting business had evolved into something much larger. My partnership with Marcus, a brilliant business major who understood market strategy better than anyone I'd ever met, transformed my technical skills into a scalable enterprise. We developed custom software solutions for mid-sized corporations, and our client base grew rapidly through word-of-mouth recommendations. The company we founded, TechBridge Solutions, filled a genuine market gap. We specialized in creating user-friendly business applications that eliminated common workplace inefficiencies. Our success came from listening carefully to client needs and delivering exactly what they requested rather than trying to impose generic solutions that didn't fit their specific situations. While building the business, I maintained my academic excellence and graduated summa cum laude with a dual degree in computer science and business administration. My parents didn't attend graduation, claiming they couldn't afford the trip expenses. Later, I discovered through social media that they'd spent that same weekend at an expensive resort celebrating Sarah's completion of her junior year, despite her barely maintaining a 2.5 grade point average. The years immediately after college were a whirlwind of 14-hour workdays, client meetings, and strategic planning sessions. Marcus and I reinvested every penny of profit back into the company, building our team, upgrading our technology infrastructure, and expanding our service offerings. We lived modestly, sharing a cramped apartment and eating ramen noodles most nights, but we both believed completely in our vision. Our breakthrough came when we landed a contract with a major healthcare network that needed a comprehensive patient management system. The project took 8 months to complete, but the success opened doors to similar opportunities with other large organizations. Within 2 years of graduation, TechBridge Solutions employed 15 people and had established partnerships with companies across 3 states. My personal life remained deliberately simple during this period. I dated occasionally, but found it difficult to trust people's motivations, always wondering if they were interested in me or my growing financial success. The emotional walls I'd built during childhood served me well in business negotiations, but made intimate relationships challenging. Contact with my family dwindled to maybe 4 or 5 calls per year, always initiated by them when they needed money. They never asked about my business, my health, my relationships, or my future plans. I was simply a resource to be tapped when Sarah needed something beyond their budget. Their requests grew bolder over time, moving from hundreds to thousands of dollars, always justified by vague references to Sarah's ongoing needs or family emergencies. The climactic moment of this chapter in my life came on a Tuesday morning in March. Marcus burst into my office with a huge grin, waving a contract that would change everything. A Fortune 500 company wanted to acquire TechBridge Solutions for an amount that would make both of us independently wealthy for life. After months of negotiations, due diligence investigations, and legal paperwork, the acquisition was finalized. My share of the sale, combined with the stock options in the acquiring company, was valued at just over $8 million. At age 28, I went from comfortable to genuinely wealthy overnight. The local newspaper ran a feature story about hometown tech entrepreneurs describing our company's journey from dorm room startup to major corporate acquisition. The article included photos of Marcus and me, details about our innovative software solutions, and quotes about our plans for future ventures. Within 6 hours of the newspaper hitting stands, my phone rang. My mother's voice was completely different from any previous conversation we'd had. Instead of her usual distracted, duty-bound tone, she sounded excited and affectionate. She gushed about how proud she'd always been of my accomplishments, how she'd been following my success from afar, and how the whole family was celebrating my achievements. The sudden transformation was jarring and transparent. For years, they'd treated my business like a hobby that occasionally generated spending money. Now faced with evidence of significant wealth, they were rewriting history to position themselves as supportive parents who'd always believed in my potential. My father got on the phone and started talking about father-son trips we should take, business advice he wanted to share, and family investments we could explore together. These were the same parents who'd missed my college graduation and ignored my business success for years. Now they wanted to be involved because they'd finally calculated the dollar value of maintaining a relationship with me. As I hung up the phone that day, I realized their sudden interest had nothing to do with pride, love, or genuine family connection. They'd simply identified me as a new revenue source, potentially much more lucrative than their previous strategy of small, guilt-based requests. The manipulation was evolving to match my changed circumstances, but the fundamental dynamic remained exactly the same. The transformation in my parents' behavior after the newspaper article was swift and calculated. Within a week, I went from receiving maybe one call every few months to multiple daily contacts through phone, text, and email. Their sudden enthusiasm felt performative and hollow, but the intensity of their campaign was remarkable in its thoroughness. My mother started sending lengthy texts about how she'd kept every newspaper clipping about local business achievements, claiming she'd always known I was destined for success. She'd apparently spent years bragging to neighbors about her entrepreneurial son, according to her revised version of history. The woman who couldn't be bothered to attend my high school graduation was now positioning herself as my biggest supporter. My father's approach was different, but equally transparent. He began calling with unsolicited business advice, despite having worked the same factory job for 30 years and never showing any interest in entrepreneurship. He suggested lunch meetings where we could discuss investment opportunities and family financial planning. These were the same parents who'd never asked about my business during its 6 years of growth. The requests for money evolved in scope and sophistication. Instead of asking for a few $1,000s for Sarah's immediate needs, they started proposing family investments and shared financial opportunities. My mother explained how they'd been researching vacation rental properties and thought I might want to partner with them on a beach house that could serve as both a family gathering place and an income-generating asset. Sarah's role in their strategy became more apparent as well. She started calling regularly, something she'd never done before, with conversations that felt scripted and unnatural. She'd ask detailed questions about my business, my financial planning, and my future goals. Her interest seemed genuine, until I realized she was gathering information that somehow made its way back to our parents in subsequent conversations. The guilt tactics intensified dramatically. My mother began referencing Sarah's childhood illness in new ways, explaining how the trauma had affected the entire family and created financial hardships that persisted to the present day. She suggested that my success was partly built on the sacrifices they'd made during those difficult years, and that helping the family now would be a way of honoring that shared struggle. My father took a more direct approach, explaining that successful children had obligations to their parents and siblings. He cited examples of other families where prosperous sons and daughters supported their relatives, presenting this as a natural and expected progression of family relationships. The pressure was subtle but persistent. They began involving extended family members in their campaign. My aunt called to congratulate me on my success and casually mentioned how proud my parents were, but also how they'd struggled financially over the years and deserved to enjoy some security now that their son had done so well. My grandfather sent a letter expressing pride in my achievements and suggesting that family wealth should benefit everyone, not just the individual who earned it. The social manipulation extended to their community presence as well. They started hosting dinner parties and family gatherings that they'd never organized before, always making sure to mention my success to their guests. They positioned themselves as humble parents who'd raised a remarkable son, accepting praise for my achievements as if they'd been instrumental in fostering my development. My girlfriend Jennifer, whom I'd started dating seriously a few months earlier, immediately saw through their behavior. She'd grown up in a healthy family dynamic and recognized manipulation tactics that I'd become numb to through years of exposure. After meeting my parents for the first time, she gently pointed out how their conversation focused entirely on my financial capabilities, rather than my personal happiness or well-being. Jennifer's observations forced me to examine my family relationships with fresh perspective. She noted how my parents asked detailed questions about my investment portfolio, but never inquired about my health, my relationship, satisfaction, or my personal goals. They remembered every detail about my business income, but couldn't recall basic facts about my interests, friends, or daily life. The breaking point came during a family dinner I'd agreed to attend after weeks of persistent invitations. My parents had prepared an elaborate meal and decorated the dining room with photos spanning my childhood and college years, creating what felt like a shrine to my achievements. The whole production felt artificial and staged. During dinner, they unveiled their master plan. They'd researched a restaurant franchise opportunity that required a $200,000 initial investment. They presented a detailed business proposal complete with projected revenues and a timeline for payback. They positioned this as a family business opportunity that would allow them to work together while generating income for everyone involved. The presentation was polished and thorough, clearly, the result of considerable research and planning. They'd anticipated my questions about market competition, operational requirements, and financial projections. What struck me most was the effort they'd invested in this proposal compared to the complete lack of interest they'd shown in my actual business over the years. My mother explained that this venture would finally allow them to spend quality time together as a family while building something meaningful for future generations. My father added that they'd chosen a restaurant concept because it would give Sarah valuable business experience and provide a foundation for her future career development. The climactic twist of this elaborate manipulation became apparent when I asked practical questions about their timeline and commitment level. Through careful questioning, I discovered they'd already signed preliminary agreements and made initial payments assuming my financial backing was guaranteed. They'd committed to lease agreements, equipment purchases, and staffing plans without having the necessary capital, expecting me to cover the shortfall as a family obligation. The realization that they'd made major financial commitments based on presumed access to my money was shocking. They'd moved beyond asking for help to simply assuming my resources were available for their projects. The restaurant franchise wasn't a family business opportunity at all. It was a financial obligation they'd created and expected me to fulfill without consultation or consent. As I sat at that dinner table surrounded by their carefully orchestrated display of family warmth and shared ambition, I understood that this manipulation campaign wasn't driven by a desire for closer family relationships. They viewed my success as their opportunity for financial security and upward social mobility, with my consent being optional rather than required. The restaurant franchise revelation prompted me to take a step back and examine my family's financial behavior more systematically. Their assumption that my money was automatically available for their projects suggested a level of entitlement that demanded investigation. I decided to hire a private investigator to conduct a comprehensive background check on my parents' financial activities. Marcus recommended a discreet investigation firm that specialized in financial fraud cases. The initial meeting with Detective Rodriguez was uncomfortable but necessary. I explained my concerns about my parents' spending patterns, their persistent requests for money, and their recent escalation to making financial commitments on my behalf without permission. Within 2 weeks, Detective Rodriguez presented me with a comprehensive report that revealed the depth of my parents' deception. Their financial situation was far worse than I had imagined, but not for the reasons they'd been claiming. Instead of struggling due to medical expenses from Sarah's childhood illness, they were drowning in debt from gambling and luxury spending. The evidence was extensive and damning. Credit card statements showed regular trips to casinos, expensive restaurant meals, designer clothing purchases, and luxury vacation expenses. Their mortgage had been refinanced 3 times to extract equity for non-essential spending. They'd taken out personal loans using my early business success as collateral for their creditworthiness claims. Most shocking was the discovery that Sarah had been perfectly healthy for over 15 years, with 0 ongoing medical expenses related to her childhood leukemia. Her regular doctor visits were routine checkups that cost less than $200 annually. The expensive treatments and medications my parents had been referencing were completely fictional. The investigation revealed they'd been using Sarah's medical history as a cover story for multiple financial scams. They'd solicited donations from their church congregation, their workplace colleagues, and extended family members claiming ongoing medical expenses that didn't exist. A local charity had provided them with grocery gift cards and utility payment assistance based on their claims of medical hardship. Detective Rodriguez uncovered documentation showing they'd applied for numerous hardship programs and assistance funds using Sarah's illness as justification. They'd received thousands of dollars in aid intended for families genuinely struggling with medical expenses while spending their actual income on entertainment and luxury items. The most devastating discovery was evidence that they'd stolen my college fund. The $10,000 my grandparents had saved for my education had been withdrawn when I was 16 to pay for Sarah's car and their European vacation. They'd forged documents claiming the money was needed for emergency medical procedures that never occurred. The investigation also revealed they'd been claiming me as a dependent on their tax returns for 3 years after I'd moved out and become financially independent. They'd intercepted and stolen my tax refunds by providing the IRS with their mailing address as my residence. The refund money had funded their gambling and vacation expenses. Sarah's role in their schemes was more complicated than I'd initially understood. She wasn't an active participant in their fraud, but she'd been aware of many of their lies and had felt pressured to support their stories when questioned by relatives or aid organizations. She'd been uncomfortable with the deception, but afraid to contradict our parents directly. When I confronted Sarah privately about the investigation findings, she broke down and confirmed most of the details. She admitted she'd been asking me for money under the guise of medical expenses because our parents had coached her on what to say. She revealed that most of the money I'd sent over the years had gone directly to covering their gambling debts and credit card payments. Sarah expressed genuine remorse for her participation in their manipulation, explaining that she'd felt trapped between loyalty to our parents and guilt about deceiving me. She'd wanted to tell me the truth multiple times, but feared our parents' reaction if she exposed their lies. She'd also been afraid I'd blame her for the childhood favoritism that had shaped our family dynamic. The most recent and egregious discovery was that my parents had been forging my signature on loan applications. Using publicly available information about my business success, they'd applied for and received multiple personal loans totaling over $300,000. They'd provided my name as a guarantor and co-signer without my knowledge or consent. Detective Rodriguez explained that their plan appeared to involve accumulating as much debt as possible in my name, then declaring bankruptcy or simply disappearing, leaving me legally responsible for their financial obligations. They'd been systematically using my credit rating and reputation to secure loans they never intended to repay. The forged loan documents were sophisticated enough to fool several lenders. They'd practiced my signature extensively and had created fake employment verification documents claiming I worked for their fictitious family business. The level of premeditation and criminal intent was staggering. Armed with this evidence, I scheduled a meeting with my attorney to explore legal options. The fraud charges could include identity theft, loan fraud, tax fraud, and theft of government benefits. The potential criminal penalties were severe, including significant prison time and financial restitution requirements. My attorney advised me to document all financial losses and compile a comprehensive record of their fraudulent activities before confronting them directly. He suggested offering them an opportunity to make voluntary restitution before pursuing criminal charges, partly to protect Sarah from being implicated in their schemes. The final piece of evidence that crystallized my understanding of their true character was a recorded conversation Detective Rodriguez had obtained through legal surveillance. My parents were discussing their plans for my money with casual entitlement, treating my financial success as their retirement fund, and referring to me as their insurance policy for future security. In that recorded conversation, my mother laughed about how easy it had been to manipulate me over the years by mentioning Sarah's medical needs. My father joked that they'd found the perfect formula for extracting money from their success son without having to maintain any real relationship with me. As I reviewed all this evidence, I realized that every interaction with my parents over the past decade had been calculated and manipulative. They'd never seen me as their son who deserved love and respect. To them, I was simply a resource to be exploited through emotional manipulation and, when necessary, outright fraud. The web of lies they'd constructed was comprehensive and sophisticated. They'd built their entire lifestyle around my financial success, while maintaining the fiction that they were struggling parents who'd sacrificed everything for their children. The reality was that they were criminals who'd systematically stolen from me, defrauded aid organizations, and committed identity theft to fund their gambling and luxury spending habits. Armed with comprehensive evidence of my parents' fraud and manipulation, I spent several days planning my approach to confronting them. My attorney had advised me to give them one opportunity to confess and make restitution before pursuing criminal charges. I decided to arrange a family meeting under the pretense of discussing Sarah's future and family financial planning. I called my mother and suggested we have dinner at their house to talk about important family matters. She immediately assumed I was ready to discuss their restaurant franchise proposal and sounded excited about finally moving forward with their plans. Her enthusiasm, knowing what I now knew about their financial deception, felt nauseating. I arrived at their house on a Saturday evening with a briefcase containing photocopies of every piece of evidence Detective Rodriguez had uncovered. Sarah was already there, looking nervous because I'd warned her privately that I planned to address their fraudulent behavior directly. I'd assured her that my focus would be on our parents' actions rather than her reluctant participation. The dinner started with their usual performance of family warmth and togetherness. My mother had prepared my childhood favorite meal and decorated the table with flowers and candles. My father made toasts about family unity and shared success. The entire production felt grotesque, given what I knew about their true motivations and behavior. After dinner, I suggested we move to the living room for our family discussion. My parents sat close together on the couch, holding hands and smiling expectantly. Sarah sat in the armchair across from me, looking increasingly uncomfortable as I opened my briefcase and began arranging documents on the coffee table. I started by explaining that I'd become concerned about some financial irregularities and had hired a professional investigator to help me understand our family's true situation. The change in their expressions was immediate and telling. My mother's smile vanished completely while my father's face shifted from anticipation to suspicion. I presented the evidence systematically, beginning with their actual financial records, showing gambling expenses, luxury purchases, and repeated loan applications. My mother tried to interrupt with explanations about medical expenses, but I continued methodically through the documentation, giving them no opportunity to deflect or create new lies. The loan documents with my forged signature created the most dramatic reaction. My father's face went pale while my mother began crying, but not the manipulative tears I'd seen before. These were tears of panic as she realized the extent of evidence I'd accumulated against them. I explained how they'd used Sarah's childhood illness as a cover story for fraudulent charity applications, stolen aid money intended for genuinely needy families, and manipulated relatives and friends into providing financial assistance based on fabricated medical emergencies. When I presented the evidence of my stolen college fund and intercepted tax refunds, my father finally spoke. His initial response was anger rather than remorse. He accused me of betraying family trust by hiring investigators and invading their privacy. He suggested that successful children had obligations to help their parents, regardless of how that help was requested. My mother took a different approach, attempting to minimize their actions by claiming they'd always intended to pay everything back once the restaurant business became profitable. She portrayed their fraud as temporary borrowing rather than theft, insisting that family members shouldn't need permission to access shared resources. Their attempts at justification revealed the depth of their entitlement and lack of genuine remorse. They'd convinced themselves that my success belonged to the entire family and that I was being unreasonably selfish by expecting honesty and consent in our financial interactions. I explained the legal implications of their actions, including potential criminal charges for identity theft, loan fraud, and government benefits fraud. My attorney had calculated their total theft at over $400,000 when including interest penalties and my personal financial losses from their schemes. The conversation escalated when I informed them that I was immediately cutting off all financial support and would be pursuing legal action to recover my losses. My father's anger erupted into threats about destroying my reputation if I pursued criminal charges. He claimed they could prove I'd been a willing participant in their financial planning and had authorized their use of my credit and signature. My mother's response was more emotionally manipulative. She accused me of abandoning my family over money and suggested that my success had changed me into someone cold and greedy. She brought up Sarah's childhood illness again, claiming I was being vindictive about circumstances beyond anyone's control. I remained calm throughout their emotional outbursts, explaining that their theft and fraud had nothing to do with family loyalty or shared obligations. They'd committed serious crimes that had put my financial security and business reputation at risk. Their actions went far beyond asking for help and crossed into criminal behavior that demanded consequences. Sarah finally spoke up, supporting my position and admitting to our parents that she'd been uncomfortable with their lies for years. She apologized for her participation in their manipulation and expressed relief that the truth was finally being addressed directly. Her honesty triggered my mother's most vicious response. She screamed at Sarah for betraying the family and accused her of being ungrateful for everything they'd sacrificed during her illness. The mask of loving parenthood completely slipped away, revealing the calculating and selfish people underneath. I served them with legal documents I'd prepared, including cease and desist orders, prohibiting any further use of my name, or credit formal demand letters for restitution of stolen funds, and notice of my intention to pursue criminal charges if they didn't begin making voluntary payments within 30 days. As I prepared to leave, my father made one final desperate attempt at emotional manipulation. He claimed they were old and frightened, had made mistakes, but didn't deserve to have their lives destroyed. He promised they would find ways to pay me back if I gave them time and didn't involve law enforcement. My mother's final words as I walked toward the door revealed everything I needed to know about their true feelings. In a moment of complete emotional breakdown, she screamed that she wished I'd been the one who got sick instead of Sarah. She said I'd always been a difficult, ungrateful child, and that they regretted ever having me. The depth of hatred in her voice was shocking, but also liberating. Any remaining doubt about the righteousness of my decision disappeared completely. These weren't struggling parents who'd made desperate mistakes out of love for their family. They were criminals who'd systematically exploited and stolen from me for years, all while harboring genuine resentment about my existence. I left their house that night knowing I'd never return as their son seeking approval or acceptance. The relationship was permanently severed not by my choice to pursue justice, but by their choice to see me as a resource to be exploited rather than a child to be loved. The confrontation had ended with complete clarity about who they really were and what they'd always thought of me. 6 months after that devastating confrontation, the legal proceedings had concluded with results that exceeded my expectations for justice and accountability. My parents pled guilty to multiple fraud charges to avoid a lengthy trial and potential prison sentences. They were ordered to make full restitution of the $412,000 they'd stolen from me, plus legal fees and interest. The criminal court judge was particularly harsh in his sentencing remarks, noting that their abuse of charitable aid programs had diverted resources from families with genuine medical emergencies. Their fraudulent use of my identity had put my business reputation at risk and could have resulted in significant professional damage if discovered during crucial contract negotiations. My parents lost their house through foreclosure when they couldn't maintain mortgage payments without access to fraudulent loans and stolen money. They were forced to declare bankruptcy, liquidate their assets, and move into a small rental apartment. The luxury lifestyle they'd maintained through theft and manipulation disappeared completely. The restaurant franchise they'd committed to without securing proper funding collapsed immediately when the franchise company discovered their financial fraud. They lost their initial investment and faced additional civil litigation from the franchise organization for breach of contract and misrepresentation. Sarah's journey toward healing and independence became one of the most positive outcomes of this difficult period. She entered therapy to address the psychological impact of our dysfunctional family dynamics and began to understand how our parents' manipulation had affected both of our lives. She started taking responsibility for her own financial independence and career development. Sarah and I rebuilt our relationship slowly and carefully, establishing new boundaries based on mutual respect rather than the toxic family dynamics we'd grown up with. She moved into her own apartment, found full-time employment, and began developing genuine self-confidence separate from our parents' artificial praise and protection. My business continued to thrive without the emotional drainage of my family's constant financial demands and manipulation. The energy I'd previously spent managing their crises and guilt trips was redirected toward innovative projects and strategic partnerships. TechBridge Solutions expanded into new markets and developed cutting-edge software applications that revolutionized client operations. Jennifer and I grew closer throughout this challenging period, and her support during the legal proceedings strengthened our relationship immeasurably. She helped me process the emotional impact of discovering the extent of my parents' betrayal and encouraged me to focus on building positive relationships rather than dwelling on past injustices. My parents made several attempts at reconciliation through written letters, intermediary relatives, and even showing up at my office building. Each attempt followed the same pattern of self-pity, minimal accountability, and requests for financial assistance disguised as family reconciliation efforts. I maintained complete boundaries by refusing all contact and referring any communication attempts to my attorney. Their letters revealed no genuine remorse or understanding of their behavior. Instead, they focused on their current financial hardships and social embarrassment, portraying themselves as victims of my unreasonable vindictiveness. The community response to their criminal convictions was swift and decisive. Their church expelled them from membership due to their fraudulent charity applications. Former friends and colleagues distanced themselves after learning about the extent of their deception. They faced social isolation that matched their financial ruin. I established the Sarah's Strength Scholarship Fund to provide educational support for children who'd been neglected due to siblings' serious illnesses. The scholarship program addressed a gap in social services by recognizing that healthy children in medically complex families often suffer emotional and educational neglect that impacts their long-term development. The scholarship fund became a meaningful way to transform my painful childhood experiences into positive support for other families facing similar challenges. The first recipients were children who demonstrated academic excellence, despite minimal family support, mirroring my own educational journey through high school and college. Jennifer and I planned our wedding for the following spring, creating a celebration focused entirely on the family we'd chosen rather than the one I'd been born into. Marcus served as my best man. Sarah was included as a bridesmaid after our relationship fully healed, and Jennifer's warm, supportive family welcomed me completely into their circle. The wedding planning process highlighted the dramatic difference between healthy and toxic family dynamics. Jennifer's parents were genuinely interested in our happiness, offered practical support without strings attached, and celebrated our relationship without attempting to control or manipulate our decisions. My parents were not invited to the wedding, and I felt no sadness or regret about their absence. The day was filled with people who genuinely loved and supported us, creating exactly the kind of family celebration I'd always imagined but never experienced. During our wedding reception, I gave a brief speech about the difference between family by birth and family by choice. I thanked the people who'd shown me genuine love and support throughout my journey, particularly during the most challenging periods when my biological family had failed me completely. The legal settlement payments from my parents continued arriving monthly, though they frequently required attorney intervention to ensure compliance. Their resentment about the restitution requirements was evident in their continued attempts to negotiate reduced payments or extended timelines. Marcus and I launched a new venture focused on cybersecurity solutions for small businesses, leveraging our previous success and industry connections. The new company grew rapidly as businesses increasingly recognized the importance of protecting their digital assets and customer information. My personal life achieved a balance and contentment I'd never experienced before. Without the constant stress of managing my parents' manipulation and financial demands, I discovered interests and relationships that brought genuine joy rather than obligation or guilt. The final lesson from this journey became clear during a quiet evening with Jennifer, almost a year after the confrontation. We were discussing our future plans and family goals when I realized how fundamentally my understanding of family relationships had changed. I learned that being related to someone doesn't give them the right to abuse, manipulate, or steal from you. True family relationships are built on mutual respect, genuine love, and reciprocal support rather than biological obligation or emotional manipulation. The greatest gift I gave myself was permission to walk away from people who saw my love as a weakness to exploit rather than a gift to be treasured. Real family consists of people who celebrate your successes without calculating how they can benefit from them, who support you during difficulties without expecting compensation, and who respect your boundaries without attempting to manipulate your emotions. Blood relationships that lack these qualities are simply biological accidents rather than meaningful family connections. The peace I found in this understanding was profound and lasting. I no longer carried guilt about prioritizing my own well-being over toxic family obligations. I stopped seeking approval from people who were incapable of providing genuine love and support. Most importantly, I learned to recognize and appreciate the authentic relationships that replaced the hollow family dynamics I'd finally left behind. As Jennifer and I sat together that evening, planning our future and discussing our hopes for children of our own, I felt grateful for every painful step of the journey that had led me to this moment of genuine happiness and emotional freedom. The story of my parents' betrayal and manipulation had a clear ending. They faced appropriate consequences for their criminal behavior. I recovered financially and emotionally from their abuse, and I built a new life surrounded by people who valued me for who I was rather than what I could provide them. Their attempts to use my sister's illness to control and exploit me had ultimately failed completely. Justice had been served, genuine family relationships had been restored with Sarah, and I'd found the love and respect I'd always deserved with Jennifer and our chosen family of friends and supporters. Have you ever had to make the difficult decision to cut toxic family members out of your life in order to protect your own well-being and happiness? How did you find the strength to prioritize your own mental health over family obligations that felt manipulative or unfair? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Thank you for listening to my story and for your continued support. I hope sharing this experience helps others recognize that family love should never come with conditions or strings attached, and that choosing your own happiness over toxic relationships is not only acceptable but necessary for a fulfilling life. If this story resonated with you or might help someone else who's struggling with similar family dynamics, please consider liking this video, subscribing to the channel for more personal stories, and sharing it with friends who might benefit from hearing about the importance of setting healthy boundaries in family relationships. Wishing you all the courage to surround yourselves with people who truly value and respect you, and the wisdom to recognize the difference between genuine family love and manipulative obligation.